from the DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside Dave Corbin. Glad to have you with us as we explore the ideas behind today's headlines.
My left eye sees pollution. Those dirty fuels are burning. The earth's whole climate's churning. Clean energy solution. My right eye scans the bill. Fossil fuels are cheap. Wind and solar too steep. Drill, baby, drill. Predefined, misaligned, polarized division. Shuttered mind, worse than blind. 2020 vision.
How you doing, Dave?
Doing well. Can't believe that Thanksgiving is next Thursday.
Crazy.
It's come up quickly.
Yeah, well, Thanksgiving always means the end of our birthday cycle. So our middle daughter, Sarah, will be 10 on Sunday this year. Sometimes it's Thanksgiving Day, but this year it's a couple of days after. But it's always an exciting conclusion. We have an August, a September, an early November, and then a late November. So all four kids we hit in about a 3-month span there, and a lot of anticipation about birthday lists and birthday meals and parties and all the rest. So it's good to get through that season. And of course, Christmas right behind it.
Well, we have the opposite problem. We have them, our two youngest, Jack and Eliza, circled around Christmas, one 10 days before and one 8 days after. And given the nature of kids, a lot of discussion as to whose birthday is best, who got more with
Right.
Christmas sandwiched in. So
Yeah.
it's always a lot of fun. I think it's driven my wife to the point where she's just like, let's just go on one big family vacation and call it a day on birthdays, Christmas,
right.
etc. So solve the problem.
You could probably get away with that when they're a little older. I'm not sure at this stage if you can pull that off.
They're getting older, but boy, it's 8 and 10 this year for them.
Yeah,
So
it's amazing.
well, Patriots continue to roll.
Yeah, and actually we're recording on Thursday, so next game is tonight against the Falcons, which looks promising. I think it's fair to say. What's your thought about tonight's game?
Could be one of those games where it may be closer than you'd like. I hope not. I think one of the good things about the way they've been playing is their defense is so strong, and defense in football can carry out a kind of consistent set of victories. Your offense will come and go, a lot like other sports, but if you have a good defense, you've got a pretty good shot of stringing together a whole bunch of victories.
Well, and the weapons on Atlanta's side, I mean, if you can lock down Kyle Pitts, then there's not much else to worry about. So I think that'll be the goal. And, Matt Ryan has certainly been up and down this year without Calvin Ridley, without Julio Jones. Obviously, that's makes it hard, even bringing in a weapon like Pitts. So I'm optimistic about the Patriots. I think it could be a low-scoring game. It could be a 21-7, 20-10 kind of game. But I feel the Patriots are in a good position to win anyway.
Yeah, I think those numbers are good. So take them Vegas. Put your money down.
Football and baseball were pretty reliable. We'll see about basketball. We've got some skeptics on that. Hockey, you did well last year. So we've had our ups and downs as some other sports. But speaking of football, of course, fantasy football, we mentioned our big matchup last week. The Publius Posse, my team, took down the Canyon Lake Texans. Thanks to a little gamesmanship on my part, I have to admit. You had a running back on a bye. And so I picked up Ramondre Stevenson last minute, knowing that you would probably grab him if I didn't. I just put him on the bench, but it worked because the guy you got ended up getting a lot fewer points than Stevenson. So had you had Stevenson, you would have won. Sometimes the time zone helps. I think I got up early and I hit the waiver wire and I was able to get that move.
Well, this has been your fantasy sport, right? I think you've won 6 out of 7 years or something crazy like that. So
yeah, 5 out of 7.
Hard to beat the Posse.
Let's turn to Aristotle. We've got the beginning of book 4, chapters 1 and 2 to look at today. Why don't you lead us through that, Dave?
Sure. So when we move to book 4, Aristotle introduces the subject of how to approach regimes. I'm going to say that there are really 4 ways that you can approach the question of the best regime. You can either look for what is best, pure and simple. So what the absolute best regime would look like, the absolute best form of government. Or you could secondly look at, in practical terms, what you could attain what you have to work with, and what best attainable government is. Then thirdly, what would be a good government for most? So what would be a comprehensive definition of what a good regime or form of government is? And then he takes fourthly into case the circumstances of different regimes, of people with different faiths or different economies. So what is the regime that best suits the people living there, or their past laws, et cetera? So I think one of the great things about Aristotle here is he's really kind of accounted for it all. And he uses, and I think this is a really helpful analogy, he uses the example of a trainer, an athletic trainer. So if you were an athletic trainer, what would be the regimen, so regimen regime, that you would give to the best athlete, so that you could have, 10 years ago, this might have been Michael Phelps, right? Or whoever that athlete is today. It's not LeBron James, but whoever it is. But what would be that best regimen, for that individual? But secondly, well, what's the best regimen in practical terms? And here, I think the example, if we're going to work with athletic training, would be like a Tom Brady, right? That he's done the most to attain with his body, his diet, his exercise, the best he can be, because he didn't come at this, 6'5", 230 pounds with a, great muscle, speed, and all the rest. He worked to make his body kind of what it is, and to produce the type of longevity that's present here. And then thirdly, well, what's a good regimen for all of us? What should we all be doing? We'd have a certain diet, right, that was filled with fruits and vegetables, that had protein there, but we'd exercise, we'd walk 3 miles a day. So there's a regimen that would be recommended for all, and then the regimen that would be recommended for certain people relative to the circumstances. So the diet that you recommend to a 14-year-old teenager who's growing may be very different than the diet that you recommend to a 62-year-old man. So I love the use of athletic training, and I love how it opens up the discussion of politics, so that things aren't just simply cut and dry, black and white. It has to be this. Aristotle's saying, well, no, a serious view of the subject of politics requires you, what would be the perfect thing? What could be attained? What should everyone have? And then how might I, as a statesman, apply my knowledge of regimes to improve that which is in front of me?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, it's, as you just mentioned, the statesman, right? So this is not just a philosopher's work that's meant for the academy. And so Aristotle gives you a way to translate this into practical action. I think about the passage in de Tocqueville where he says the statesman's duty is to understand the nature of their regime and to understand its weaknesses, so that you know when to encourage movement in one direction and when to discourage it. Which way, this is the image I've used before, is the house leaning. Every political house leans a certain direction. None of them are foursquare. And if you're in a democracy, you better know it leans in the direction of too much equality and too much majority rule. And so you have to watch out for that, right? You have to push back in the opposite direction. On the other hand, if you're in an aristocracy, it's just the opposite. And the rich are going to have too much influence. And so you need to think about that as you're framing policies, as you're thinking about regime level decisions. So I think it's really practical help for the statesman who wants to do more than just react to the latest polls, or who's thinking more fundamentally than just winning the next election, and yet isn't philosophical in sort of the ivory tower sense, right? But wants to use this reflection to lead to action. Aristotle gives us a lot of useful insights, and as well as a schematic, sort of an approach that we can take in applying these lessons and these principles to contemporary questions.
This week, I went to DC on Friday to attend a memorial service for our mentor, Angelo Codavilla. And I was asked to write something on his life. And when you describe Aristotle here, Matt, it sounds just like a Codavilla teaching on the subject. So I spoke the following: when you have a conversation with Codavilla, most of the time it followed the same progression. He'd want you to get to the point. He'd want you to ask what is required, given what we know, figure out what you're up against and whether you have the means to do the right thing. And most importantly, realize that if your words and deeds do not correspond to reality, you won't be able to accomplish the right thing. And he delivered this instruction in a very hard way, but it's taking into account all this discussion here. Well, what would the best thing be? But what do you have at your disposal? Do you have the means to be able to achieve the ends that you like? What are some generally good means to do things? So his mind was very Aristotelian in how he approached all different types of regimes when he looked at foreign policy, but in particular, the American regime. And I think when we interviewed him last in May, it was really interesting because he would give a clear-sighted view that, here we are, a series of podcast democracy in America today, but what if the regime is becoming oligarchic? What is necessary given that oligarchic tilting, to go back to your house metaphor?
Yeah, exactly. And I agree. That was just the method that Dr. Tocqueville would apply. And of course, in the book that probably has the closest connection to that, The Character of Nations, he does that in a very modern way.
I think the other point that I make here is that one of the things that we've seen, particularly in world history and political ideas over the last 150, 200 years, are a lot of modern attempts at some utopian solution. If we just create a communist society, then all of our ills are going to go away. If we just grow our economy to the point where our GNP is up to 7% growth every year, then, a lot of our problems are going to go away. So you have these utopian visions of what politics can look like. And then you have the anxiety and depression and dissolution that come from the fact that your plans never fit the utopian vision that you that you had in the first place. Well, and finally, the last thing I'd say on this, there was hope right at the end of the 20th century that we would reach the end of history, that we wouldn't have to talk about regimes any longer, that that really the dominant regime would be a form of Western liberal capitalism, where in the realm of ideas, philosophy, religion, we just agreed to disagree. Everything was indeterminate. And in the realm of material and production and economics, we just say, okay, the more the better, the more it's kind of brought together within a free market society, the better off that we'd be. So we trade a lot with one another and we don't argue with one another. End of story. A McDonald's on every block within 15, 20, 25 years. Hegel's dialectic come to fruition. And that
hasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, that has not been the case. That was certainly not the case shortly after these predictions. We had 9/11. We still have all of this challenge in terms of ideas and all the rest. And I think that Aristotle's system accounts for that, whereas our utopian dream has not.
Agreed.
All right. The second topic that Aristotle takes up, which is really interesting as well, is that he had referenced that there are these 6 regimes, 3 that are true and 3 that are perverse. The 3 that are true are regime types, forms of government in which the office holders care about the common interest or the common good. If that's one individual, we call that a kingship. If that's two or few individuals, we call it an aristocracy. If it's the multitude who cares for the common good, we call it a polity. And then the perverse types of regimes are where the one, the few, and the many simply hold office and rule in a way that is to their own advantage or benefit. And these types are tyranny, and then oligarchy, and then finally democracy. And Aristotle is going to say, well, they're just not 6 types of regimes. In fact, that within each of these types, archetypes, or the tyranny, democracy, oligarchy, kingship, aristocracy, and polity, there are subtypes. And I think it opens up the discussion even further, because you can think about, okay, this is a democracy that is functioning at 40%. What would it look like to make its functioning better? How could you make it a better democracy? Or here's an oligarchy that's gone in the wrong direction. Why is it gone in the wrong direction? So almost like a doctor looking at, your health, right? You have different numbers on how you're doing. So or your heart health may be this, but then you've got, a different element. So it takes into account the variety of factors that go into a well-functioning regime and a not so well-functioning regime, given the particular types.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think we both used in class as a way of talking about the American regime over time. So, you could say, well, we're always in that category of polity or maybe democracy, depending on your assessment of the justice of the regime. But that's not very interesting, and it doesn't really account for some of the things that have happened over the course of time. And so, if you think about, one, few, many as a continuum, so you have the absolute rule of the one at one extreme, and you have the day-to-day rule of everybody at the other. Regimes fall in between. Right? We have a representative system. We have periodic elections. The people are very much involved, but they're not deciding the laws. And so where is that? Well, it's not all the way to the far side of that one, few, many continuum. It's somewhere toward maybe the aristocratic side because of the element of representation. And that could change over time. As we had early in our history, obviously the vote was much more severely restricted. You had to be a white male of property at first, and then it was leave out the property requirement, and then it was some women, and then it was no racial distinctions, and of course all that developed over a period of years. And so you could think about on that one, few, many continuum, you're moving toward a greater many. Likewise, vertically, you talk about, are you achieving the common good or the good of the leaders? Well, most practical experiences, it's kind of a mix, isn't it? We have the perfect just regime at the very top. So, well, that's absolutely every measure is about the common good and justice, but we don't live in that. We're not going to live in that. That's not anything we're going to experience here on Earth. But on the other hand, thankfully, the worst extremes are rare. Maybe we've had some experience of that in the 20th century, or pretty close. In Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union or Pol Pot's Cambodia for in the 1970s. But most places, even if they're not great, even if they're, you say, below the line that separates the good from the bad, they're less bad than that extreme. And we can talk about a regime moving in a positive direction or a negative direction. One of the things I'm teaching my students right now as we go through the period of the Jacksonian era into the pre-Civil War period is that there's a decline in the justice of the American regime during this period. That the conceptions of justice that are there at the time of the founding are being abandoned to a certain degree. There's an argument being made that slavery is good, that becomes prominent and strong. There's other arguments that are relativizing political matters and making the question of justice a matter of sort of personal judgment or determination. So, all that allows us to talk about a regime moving dynamically more toward the ideal or further away from the ideal. And I think Aristotle is very helpful on this point in helping us to see that while it's useful to have that initial category, one of these 6 boxes, there's also something that happens within the history of a regime that moves it around a little bit, perhaps within a single box over the course of time.
I know someone who wrote a dissertation about that topic.
Yeah, that's right. It's a long time ago.
Third item that Aristotle brings up, also quite interesting given his predecessor, Plato, and the great work, The Republic. Aristotle ranks the 6 major archetypes, and he does so in a more, I guess what you'd say, balanced way. He's going to say that the best regime is the rule of one for the common good. Kingship is the best regime. And then he's going to say the second best regime is where the few rule for the common good. And then he's going to come around and say the third best regime is when the many rule for the common good. But then here's what he does. He says the fourth best regime is when the many rule for their own interest.
The snake draft. Yeah.
He does a snake draft. Exactly. So he comes around and he says, we're going to get to the point where democracy is better. The rule of the many for the interest of the many is better than the rule of the few, oligarchy, for the interest of the few. And the worst type of regime is tyranny, the rule of the one for the interest of the one. So it's interesting that he does this, that he ranks regimes like this, because what he's basically telling you is he's reaffirming this idea that what is most central, right, is that the regime rule for the common good. But then he's undercutting the idea that it's just simply a matter of a number, right? That makes the difference, because or he's going to say the one can do a whole bunch of good, but the one can be terrible. But if you can do quite a bit of good, but they can be somewhat terrible, the many can do maybe not as good, but the harm they're going to do, right, is probably less. And it's a different take on the one, the few, and the many than I think that we're given by Socrates in the Republic.
Yeah, that's right. There's an important flip, in particular between democracy and oligarchy, right? So in Plato, oligarchy is preferable because oligarchy is closer to the knowledge of the good, or less far removed from that, because democracy relativizes everything. And so it's only one step away from tyranny, which turns the good into the bad and the bad into the good. But here, I think Aristotle's got a different measure or metric here. And he's saying, well, how many people's good will be achieved? Well, it's better that it's the majority. Of course, best if it's everybody, right? But it's better that it's the majority than that it's only a minority, an oligarchy. And of course, it's worst of all if it's only one person, right? So the majority is wrong when it harms the minority, but it's closer to the common good when the majority gets its way than when a small minority of oligarchs get their way, or when a single tyrant is able to get his way.
Yeah, well said, Matt. He ranks the degree to which the good is achieved for the greatest amount of people, rather than ranking the types of love. When there's love of wisdom,
right,
love of honor, love of wealth, love of freedom and equality, love of power. So it's an important pivot in this discussion.
Yeah, and I think you might wonder, well, why is then the rule of the one better than the rule of the few, better than the rule of the many, if they're all aiming at the common good? And I think the answer there in Aristotle is that in order to actually achieve the good, you need both virtue and wisdom. And the wisdom available to the one wisest and most good is a more comprehensive wisdom than you would find in a group, a small group, and certainly more than you would find in the multitude. Even if that multitude was aiming in the right direction, how often would they achieve that? It wouldn't be as high a rate of achievement, perhaps, as that single wisest person who was motivated to do the right thing.
So I want to end this discussion by turning to an essay that I think is important to both of us, written by Harry Jaffa, who was Angelo Codavilla's teacher at Claremont. And the essay is titled "The American Founding as the Best Regime." So take what we've learned from Aristotle here in parts 1 and 2 of book 4 of the Politics and interweave it with Jaffa's argument in this essay, just in broad terms, Matt. What is Jaffa saying here?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting about it is just, the title of the piece, right, shows there's something going on in the American project that could be of deep philosophical significance. I use this idea at the beginning of my class on American political thought and practice, and I say, there's big questions you've been asking when you've taken foundations of politics, and you've asked the question, what's the best regime? And there were Americans at the time of the founding that thought they'd actually answered that question. And they had a plausible claim to having answered that question. And if you take the work of the Declaration of Independence, the ideas there, layer on top of that the Constitution, the theory embedded within it, and really best expounded by the Federalist Papers, you put all that together, that kind of founding era thought, that republic, Harry Jaffa is arguing, has some claim to being the best regime, the best practical regime, right? It's not that city and speech for the individual philosopher that's the single best life. But what he does is he argues, in essence, that the key challenge that emerges, especially with Christianity, is the reconciliation of the claims of the city of man and the city of God, and of politics and religion. And his argument is that the American founding resolves that question in the best way, insofar as it limits the role of politics without going the whole direction of the modern project, and saying that, in essence, that limited role of politics is also reflective of the fact that our only purpose in life is just to live a long, comfortable life.
Yeah, two great paragraphs in this essay. So this is Jaffa writing. As I have often written, the United States is the first nation in the world to declare its independence, not because of any particular qualities or merits of its own, but because of rights which it shared with all men everywhere. In so doing, it declared the ground of, quote, government of the people, by the people, for the people, end quote, in a sense absolutely unprecedented. In so doing, it laid an equally unprecedented claim to the character of the best regime of Western civilization. And then to your point, this latter claim cannot be understood in the light of the doctrine of the best regime as it is found, for example, in Plato and Aristotle. For them, the best regime was that of, quote, the examined life, end quote, as defined by Socratic skepticism. Moral virtue, although necessary for human happiness, did not represent in itself the highest of all possible ends. That was to be found in purely contemplative activity. Biblical religion, however, found not the examined life, but the life of obedient love of the living God to be the highest of all possible ends of human existence. Like classical philosophy, biblical religion finds that man's highest end transcends morality. For man's highest end, his relationship with God, is a transmoral end. Biblical religion presupposes a living God whose existence is primarily and essentially a matter of faith. Whatever demonstrations unassisted reasons might take of God's existence and attributes may complement or supplement the teachings of faith, but they can never supplant faith as the ground of belief, faith that Jaffa would argue is available to all.
Yeah, and that's an important point that then, how does this come back to a government, right? And so the argument that Jaffa makes is really similar to something you find in John Adams' thoughts on government. So he talks about happiness there in two dimensions. He talks about the happiness of society as being things like prosperity, things like a kind of a comfortable life, but the happiness of man as being virtue. And so you try to put those two things together and you say, well, how's he using happiness in two different ways? But it's two different categories. There's the job of government, which provides a context in which, to use the language of the Declaration, you pursue happiness, but that happiness is not entailed by the things the government provides. Having commodious living and the things that you need to kind of get by is a precondition, perhaps, for some elements of a happy life, although not all of them require that. But it's not the same thing as a happy life. And so one of the faults of the modern project has been to take out this other kind of happiness that's grounded not only in scripture, but also has connections back to Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and to say, well, no, we're happy if we have stuff, if our material needs are satisfied. And what the American founding was saying, according to Jaffa's interpretation, is that that's not enough. That this Christian ideal of virtue and ultimately finding one's highest end in God, that is still the highest end. But it's not an end that government will accomplish for us. Government isn't the instrument that leads us in that direction. But government can provide a context where it's possible for us to pursue that ultimate happiness. We're going to wrap up the show with de Tocqueville's crystal ball. Now we're just over the midpoint of the NFL season. And so it's always a little bit concerning, right, to go back and review your predictions at this stage. We made a prediction for every team, every record for every team, playoffs, all the way through the whole season, essentially. And so now it's time to have a little bit of a reckoning with how we've done so far. And actually, it's not been too bad. So you look at the 7 teams that are in the playoffs right now, if the season ended today. Dave, you got 6 of the 7 in the AFC. I've got 5 of the 7. We won't read the whole list here, but what I'm going to do is give you a chance on the AFC side first to kind of a redo, right? A team that maybe surprised you, that's been a disappointment, or maybe on the positive side, done better than expected, and give you a chance to revise that prediction moving forward.
Yeah, well, I look at my list of division winners in the AFC. Buffalo, I would still go with. Kansas City looks like they're going to take their division now, probably not at 13-4. I probably pick the Ravens over the Steelers. I think they're a more balanced team. But then I think the Titans, I think they have their division locked up and probably have a pretty good shot at a number 1 seed. So I wouldn't change any of those things. I still think the Patriots are on their way to a wild card seeding. I still think the Chargers have probably the most opportunity to get in there as well. I guess of my 7 teams, the one I have the least faith in right now is the Steelers. I think that, but they have a good defense, so that could get them in at the end of the day. But yeah, I like where I am in the AFC. I do think the Patriots are going to win a playoff game. I think that they may win 2 even. So I'm happy as a Patriots fan that my early prediction of them having a better year has come true.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, you've done very, very well. And, Kansas City is probably, as you say, not going to end up 13-4. They have to win their last 7 games to pull that off. Steelers are not going to be 13-4 either, because they've got a tie with the Detroit Lions. So we know that they're not going to just have wins and losses. Looking over my list, I guess the one that I'm most disappointed with is the Browns. I had them down as 11-6 wild card team behind the Ravens. Right now they're 5-5. That's, that probably is about where they are. So I think that's probably going to be a miss on my part. Bengals have been better than expected. I had the Steelers not doing well, and they've been maybe a little better than expected. That whole division's been a little topsy-turvy, although the Ravens looked like they're going to land in first place, as I had thought. So, I think, again, overall, AFC, our picture looks pretty good. NFC, not quite as strong. So I've got 4 out of the 7 teams in my list of playoff teams that are currently in position for that. You've got 5 out of 7. Let's do the same thing, Dave. Any redos that you want there?
Fitzmagic never worked for me. I thought that he would somehow get the Washington football team into a higher ranking, and he gets injured early, and
that hurt.
That situation's in disarray. I think my other choice, the Vikings, I still think that they can make the playoffs, but I had them ranked as a 2nd seed, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think everyone's been surprised by the Cardinals. I did have them in the playoffs, so they have done well. I think that my biggest takeaway is I didn't think that there'd be as much disparity as there is in the NFC. I thought that you'd have a lot of 10, 11, 12 win teams and more balance, but it's really been the opposite. You have really a lot of the higher win teams in the NFC. I'm not believing in the Packers. Maybe it's because I just don't want to. That's no hit upon your dad.
He just got stock, by the way. They just did a new release of stock this week, and he bought his first share of Packers stock. So he's a part owner of the team going forward. So you better watch what you say about that.
Yeah, I didn't know that I was, I hosted a podcast with Packers royalty, but yeah, I don't know. It depends upon Aaron Rodgers, mood and, what he wants to give in an ESPN interview day to day. I just don't, I don't see them being strong. I actually think that I had the Cowboys on my list of 7 to make it there. I think there's something going on there. The Cowboys and Rams to me seem to be 2 teams that would probably make it to the championship if I had to pick now. And so we'll see. I'm not, I think the Bucks, it's always hard to have a good season after a Super Bowl. And I'm still of the mindset that just won't happen.
For me, the 2 big misses are the Cardinals and the Cowboys, who right now are the 2nd and 3rd seeds. I didn't have them in the playoffs at all. I had Washington football team winning that division. Thought it was still a relatively weak division, but Dak's come back and Dallas's offense is rolling and their defense is much improved. So, good for them. And I'm sure there's a lot of excitement down in your part of the country, Dave, over their performance. And Arizona as well, 8-2. Are they going to be 13-4 by the end of the season? Maybe not, but still a very strong team in a tough division. They've held up well. If Kyler Murray is healthy, then I think there's a lot to be optimistic about there in Arizona. So those 2 big misses for me. Seattle was the other team, rooting for my mom's team up there in the Pacific Northwest. It's not gone well. Some of that's obviously Russell Wilson injury, but it just seems like, after a great run, that team needs a refresh, and it may just be, part of that normal cycle. It's just maybe kicked in a year earlier than we might have anticipated. And just going to be kind of a struggle to the finish. Some high draft picks, and they'll probably reload out there. They still have some talent, but I think it's probably not going to finish well for the Seahawks.
Maybe Mrs. Parks needs to buy an ownership stake in the Seahawks or something like that.
Yeah. If that was available, maybe that would help.
Yeah, that'd make for well, they had their game last week, right?
That's right.
Mom and dad. Yeah, so.
That's right. Yeah, they weren't going to watch it until after it was over, and then whoever team 1 was going to enjoy it, the other one was going to read a book. So
Nice. I like it. I like it.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thank you, as always, for listening. Please remember to subscribe and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget, you can contact us at democracyinamericatoday@gmail.com. Look forward to talking to you real soon.
2020 vision.